The sound of a Ferrari engine is not just noise, it is a symphony, mechanical fury blended with human obsession. A shriek of 12 cylinders echoing down a racetrack, bouncing off stone walls in Monaco, or tearing across the Mulsanne Strait at Le Mans. It is the sound of glory, of defiance, of Italian pride. But behind every Ferrari, every sculpted curve, every screaming engine, lies the vision of one man. A man who was not an engineer, not a designer, and not even the greatest racing driver. Instead, he was something more dangerous, a dreamer consumed by obsession. That man was Enzo Ferrari. His name today conjures images of scarlet-red Formula One cars, of priceless classics like the Ferrari 250 GTO, of the raw brutality of the Ferrari F40. But the Ferrari brand was not born from luxury or wealth. It was born from struggle, tragedy, and relentless ambition. Enzo's story is one of contradictions. He was ruthless in pursuit of victory, yet sentimental about his homeland of Modena. He created cars of breathtaking beauty, yet claimed he only built road cars to fund racing. He was adored by fans and feared by his employees. To some, he was a genius. To others, a tyrant. Ferrari is more than a car company. It is a kingdom forged in speed. Its emblem, the prancing horse, is not just a logo, but a banner carried into battle, a symbol of national pride that grew from the ashes of war-torn Italy. And it all began with one man who, as a boy, stood trackside watching the great Italian driver Felice Nazzaro in 1908. That single day lit a fire inside him that would never go out. But to understand Ferrari, you must understand Enzo. His life was scarred by personal loss. His father and brother taken by illness, his only son Dino gone too soon. His career was fueled by stubborn willpower, the refusal to accept defeat, the insistence that Ferrari would always race on its own terms. Enzo Ferrari's journey is not simply about cars. It is about war and recovery, about rivalry and revenge, about how a single-minded vision can give birth to a legend. It is about the battles fought not only on racetracks, but in boardrooms, in factories, and in the heart of a man who lived only for the roar of an engine. This is the story of how a poor boy from Modena became the architect of one of the greatest empires in automotive history. A story that takes us from dusty Italian roads to the bright lights of Monaco, from the chaos of post-war Europe to the heights of Formula One domination. This is the story of Enzo Ferrari, the man who built not just cars, but immortality on four wheels. The legend of Ferrari begins long before the first prancing horse was ever painted on the nose of a car. It begins in the quiet, cobblestone streets of Modena, Italy, where on a chilly February morning in 1898, a boy named Enzo Anselmo Ferrari entered the world. No one could have imagined that this child, born to a modest family in northern Italy, would one day create the most iconic brand in automotive history. Enzo's father, Alfredo Ferrari, was a metalworker who ran a small workshop, crafting parts and machinery for local businesses. The family lived simply, but their modest home carried the smell of iron and oil, a world of gears, pistons, and clanging hammers. These sounds became the soundtrack of Enzo's early life, planting in him a fascination with machines. But Enzo's destiny was not shaped in the workshop alone. In 1908, when Enzo was just 10 years old, Alfredo took him to watch a car race on the streets of Bologna. The boy stood wide-eyed as the mighty Felice Nazzaro, one of Italy's greatest racing drivers, thundered past in his Fiat. The roar of the engine, the dust kicked up from the road, the wild cheers of the crowd. In that instant, young Enzo's heart was captured. He would later recall that moment as the spark that ignited his lifelong obsession. Not merely with cars, but with speed, competition, and victory. Yet life in early 20th century Italy was far from romantic. The Ferrari family struggled financially, and Enzo's formal education was limited. He was not a scholar. He disliked traditional schooling and found his true lessons in the workshop, watching his father shape metal and fix machines. The world around him was also changing. The First World War swept across Europe, leaving devastation in its wake. Tragedy struck the Ferrari family hard. Both Enzo's father and his older brother, also named Alfredo, succumbed to illness during the war years. Enzo himself barely survived the deadly Spanish flu pandemic in 1918, an illness that left him frail but fiercely determined. These losses carved deep scars into his soul, fueling a relentless drive to achieve something greater, as though victory on the racetrack could avenge the cruelty of fate. When the war ended, Enzo found himself with little more than ambition. Italy was struggling economically, but Enzo sought work wherever he could. He managed to secure a job as a test driver for a small car company, and later found himself behind the wheel in local races. His raw passion outshone his lack of polish. While he was not the most naturally talented driver, he possessed courage and persistence, qualities that caught the eye of Alfa Romeo, the Italian car maker rising in the world of motorsport. By the early 1920s, Enzo Ferrari was racing for Alfa Romeo, competing in events across Italy. He experienced modest success, but he was no Tazio Nuvolari, no national hero behind the wheel. Enzo came to a realization that would define his future. His gift was not in being the fastest driver. His true genius lay elsewhere, in understanding the car itself, in organizing a team, in leading others to victory. This insight set the stage for what would become his life's work. In 1929, while still connected to Alfa Romeo, Enzo established Scuderia Ferrari, a racing team that would prepare and run Alfa Romeo cars for private drivers. The team quickly became a powerhouse in Italian racing, its cars marked with a distinctive emblem, a black prancing horse on a yellow background. The horse was a gift from the family of World War I flying ace Francesco Baracca, who had painted the symbol on his fighter plane. Enzo adopted it, adding his hometown's yellow as the background. That emblem, the Cavallino Rampante, would become one of the most famous symbols in automotive history. But even as Scuderia Ferrari grew in reputation, Enzo remained restless. He wanted more than to run a racing team under another company's badge. He wanted a car of his own, a machine that bore his name, a Ferrari not just on paper but in steel and speed. Yet the road to that dream was long, twisted, and filled with obstacles. By the mid-1930s, his relationship with Alfa Romeo had grown complicated. He had earned respect as a team manager, but Enzo chafed under the control of others. In 1939, he finally left Alfa Romeo to establish his own company, but legal restrictions prevented him from using the Ferrari name on cars for several years. Instead, he created Auto Avio Costruzioni, a modest venture that built machine tools and parts. It was a small, fragile beginning, and it coincided with the darkest chapter of European history, World War II. Enzo Ferrari's early life is a story of ambition forged in hardship. The death of loved ones, the scars of war, the struggle of post-war Italy, all of these trials shaped a man who would stop at nothing to see his vision realized. His obsession with racing became his compass, his guiding star. He was not interested in wealth, nor comfort, nor compromise. For Enzo, there was only the pursuit of speed, the hunger for victory, the belief that cars existed for one purpose, to race and to win. The Ferrari we know today, the shimmering road cars, the Formula One victories, the cultural legend, all of it was born from this crucible of loss and ambition. But before Ferrari became an empire, Enzo Ferrari would face years of failures, setbacks, and brutal lessons in the harsh world of racing. Because before he was the master of Maranello, he was just a young man chasing speed on dusty Italian roads, fighting for a place in a sport that demanded everything and gave nothing easily. And it is there, in his early experiments, his first attempts at racing glory and his initial failures, that the story of Ferrari truly begins. In the early 1920s, the automobile was still a relatively new invention, but in Italy it had already become a symbol of national pride. Roads were rough, Races were dangerous, and cars were temperamental machines that could betray their drivers at any moment. It was not a sport for the faint of heart. For Enzo Ferrari, it was the only world he wanted to live in. His racing debut came in 1919, just after the Great War. Enzo entered the Parma Poggio di Berceto hill climb, driving a second-hand CMN 1520. It was a modest start, the car underpowered, the competition fierce. Enzo finished without glory, but the experience hardened his resolve. He was no longer just a spectator, he was now a participant in the dangerous ballet of motorsport. Later that year, he entered the legendary Targa Florio in Sicily, one of the toughest endurance races of its time. The roads snaked through mountains and villages, treacherous and unforgiving. Enzo managed to finish, though far from the front. He would later admit he was not a natural-born racing genius. Unlike his contemporaries, he lacked the sheer speed of a Nuvolari or a Varzi, but what he had was persistence, mechanical sympathy, and the ability to see the bigger picture. He understood that racing was not only about the driver, it was about the car, the team, and the strategy. That insight caught the attention of Alfa Romeo, which by the early 1920s was one of Italy's premier racing marques. Enzo joined Alfa first as a driver, competing in national races. His breakthrough came in 1923 when he won the Circuito del Savio race. It was a modest event, but it carried with it a historic encounter. After the race, Enzo was introduced to the mother of Italy's fallen fighter ace, Francesco Baracca. She suggested he adopt her son's emblem, the black prancing horse, as a symbol on his cars. Enzo agreed, and years later that horse would gallop across the nose of every Ferrari, becoming one of the most recognizable logos in the world. Despite this victory, Enzo knew his racing career had limits. By 1924, he won the Coppa Acerbo at Pescara. But injuries, mechanical failures, and self-doubt began to slow his trajectory. He withdrew from racing for a time, focusing more on the organizational side of motorsport. It was here that Enzo's true calling revealed itself. In 1929, with the support of wealthy backers in Modena, Enzo founded Scuderia Ferrari, literally Ferrari stable. Officially, it was not a car manufacturer, but a racing team that entered Alfa Romeo cars on behalf of private clients. Enzo became less of a driver and more of a team manager, orchestrating talent, mechanics, and resources. His sharp eye for drivers brought legends like Tazio Nuvolari into the fold, and under his leadership, Scuderia Ferrari quickly became Alfa Romeo's de facto racing arm. But success did not come without failures. Money was always tight, and keeping a racing team afloat required constant fundraising, persuasion, and sacrifice. Enzo became a relentless negotiator, striking deals, securing sponsors, and pressuring Alfa Romeo for better equipment. He was as much a businessman as a racer, though he often claimed to despise business. His single-mindedness won him enemies, but it also won races. By the early 1930s, Scuderia Ferrari was one of the most respected private racing teams in Italy. Yet Enzo still lacked something crucial: a car of his own. As long as he raced Alfa Romeos, he remained under their shadow, and the relationship grew tense. Alfa Romeo admired his organizational genius but feared his ambition. Enzo was no longer content with managing someone else's cars. He wanted independence, a machine that bore his name. The turning point came in 1933, when Alfa Romeo officially withdrew from factory racing due to financial troubles, leaving Scuderia Ferrari as their representative. For Enzo, this was both an opportunity and a burden. His team carried the national flag, but the weight of responsibility grew crushing. Victories were sweet, but defeats were brutal. And then, in 1935, Mercedes-Benz and Auto Union, backed by the might of Nazi Germany, entered the racing world with technological superiority. Italian teams, including Scuderia Ferrari, were suddenly outclassed. Enzo fought back the only way he knew how, with determination. He pushed his engineers, demanded more from his drivers, and refused to back down. But the limits of Alfa Romeo's resources became painfully clear. By the late 1930s, Alfa decided to take racing back under its direct control, absorbing Scuderia Ferrari. Enzo was placed in charge of their new racing division, Alfa Corse, but it was not the independence he craved. He was once again working under someone else's name. This was the first great failure of Enzo Ferrari's career, the collapse of his autonomy. The Scuderia Ferrari name, his creation, his pride, disappeared into Alfa Romeo's hierarchy. For a man as fiercely independent as Enzo, it was a humiliation, but it also planted the seed of defiance. In 1939, frustrated and determined, Enzo left Alfa Romeo altogether. Bound by a legal agreement that forbade him from using the Ferrari name in association with cars for 4 years, he founded a small company called Automotive Costruzioni. At first, it produced machine tools and aircraft parts, far from the glamour of racing. But Enzo had no intention of abandoning his dream. He was simply biding his time. The man who had once been a young driver on dusty Italian roads was now evolving into something far greater. A constructor, a founder, a visionary who would stop at nothing to see a car of his own creation on the racetrack. The failures of his early racing career, the collapse of Scuderia Ferrari under Alfa's control, and the harsh reality of being overshadowed by more powerful teams, all of these setbacks did not break Enzo Ferrari. They hardened him. They taught him that racing was not about fleeting victories, but about endurance, persistence, and the will to survive. And so, in the quiet years before World War II, as Europe stood on the brink of chaos, Enzo Ferrari began preparing for the next chapter of his story. A chapter where his name would finally appear on the nose of a car. By the late 1930s, Enzo Ferrari was a man without a team. His beloved Scuderia Ferrari had been absorbed by Alfa Romeo, and though he was nominally in charge of their racing division, the independence he craved was gone. In 1939, after a bitter dispute, Enzo finally severed ties with Alfa Romeo. But the split came with a price, a legal agreement that forbade him from using the Ferrari name on any car for 4 years. To most men, this would have been a crushing defeat. To Enzo, it was simply another obstacle to overcome. He refused to disappear. In September of 1939, in the quiet town of Modena, he established a small company called Automotive Costruzioni. Officially, the business manufactured machine tools, aircraft parts, and components for other industries. But behind the walls of his modest workshop, Enzo's real ambition was simmering. He wanted to build a car, his car. The opportunity came almost immediately. 2 wealthy brothers from Modena, Alberto and Lotario Rangoni Machiavelli, approached Enzo with a request. They wanted a racing car to compete in the upcoming Mille Miglia, Italy's most famous endurance road race. It was an impossible task. Enzo had no factory, no resources, no staff of his own. But he had determination, and a small team of loyal engineers who had followed him from Alfa Romeo. What emerged from their frantic efforts in early 1940 was a car unlike any other of its time, the Automotive Costruzioni 815. Many historians consider it the first Ferrari, even if it didn't carry the name. The 815 designation revealed its engineering heart. 8 cylinders, 1.5 liters of displacement. The inline-8 engine was essentially 2 Fiat 4-cylinder blocks joined together, producing around 75 horsepower. It wasn't a revolutionary powerhouse, but its lightweight aluminum body and advanced design gave it potential. Built by Carrozzeria Touring of Milan, the 815 had a sleek, aerodynamic form, long, elegant, and unmistakably Italian. Only 2 examples of the 815 were ever made, both prepared for the Mille Miglia. The cars bore the dreams of Enzo Ferrari and his fledgling workshop. For the first time, a machine had been crafted not under Alfa Romeo's banner, not by another manufacturer, but by Enzo himself. But fate was cruel. The 1940 Mille Miglia was cut short due to the escalating tensions of World War II. The Auto Avio Costruzioni 815S entered the race, but failed to finish due to mechanical issues. There was no victory, no glory, only the briefest glimpse of what might have been. Enzo's first car had been born into a world on the brink of collapse. Within months, Italy was drawn deeper into the Second World War. Racing stopped, and Enzo's dreams of building cars were forced into hibernation. Auto Avio Costruzioni turned to producing machine tools and parts for Italy's war effort, a business that kept the company alive but far from Enzo's true passion. The workshop in Modena soon became a target for Allied bombings. To survive, Enzo relocated his operations to a small rural town called Maranello, a move that would prove prophetic. The land he purchased there would one day become the beating heart of the Ferrari empire. Through the war years, Enzo remained restless. He had tasted the possibility of independence, of creating his own car, but it had been snatched away by circumstance. Every day in Maranello, amidst the grind of producing machine parts, he dreamed of the day when he could return to racing. He never lost sight of his goal, building cars not just to drive, but to win. When the war finally ended in 1945, Italy was a nation in ruins. Cities lay in rubble, factories destroyed, and resources scarce. Yet amidst the devastation, Enzo Ferrari saw opportunity. While others rebuilt slowly, he prepared for rebirth. In the workshops of Maranello, he began gathering the engineers and mechanics who had remained loyal to him. His legal restriction on using the Ferrari name had expired. Now, at last, he was free. The years of frustration and survival had hardened him. He was no longer the young driver chasing dreams on dusty roads, nor the Alfa Romeo team manager fighting for scraps of recognition. He was now something else entirely, a constructor, a founder, a man determined to leave his name, stamped onto the nose of a car. And so, in 1947, after nearly a decade of waiting, the first true Ferrari roared to life. The 125S, powered by a jewel of an engine designed by Gioacchino Colombo. But before we get to that legendary moment, it is worth remembering the 815. It may not have worn the Ferrari badge, it may not have conquered the Mille Miglia, but it was the beginning, the prototype of a dream. The Auto Avio Costruzioni 815 proved one thing: even stripped of resources, even restricted by law, even surrounded by war, Enzo Ferrari could not be stopped. His obsession with racing burned too brightly. The world would soon come to know the Ferrari name, and it would begin, not with modest failures, but with the creation of a car destined to change history. The war had left Italy broken. Cities smoldered, industries were shattered, and much of the country was struggling to find its footing. But out of this chaos, opportunity emerged for those bold enough to seize it. For Enzo Ferrari, who had endured years of frustration under legal restrictions and the devastation of global conflict, 1945 marked the beginning of a new chapter. In the small town of Maranello, where he had relocated his workshop to escape Allied bombings, Enzo began the rebirth of his dream. What had once been Auto Avio Costruzioni was about to transform into something far greater, a company that would bear his name and change the face of motorsport forever. By 1947, the world was finally ready to race again. The Italian public longed for a return to speed, to passion, to the roaring sound of engines that had once filled their streets. Enzo Ferrari was ready to give it to them. For years he had waited, planning, preparing, gathering a loyal band of engineers and mechanics. Now he had everything he needed: freedom, a workshop, and most importantly, a vision. His first step was clear. He needed a car that could carry the Ferrari name, not just as a road machine, but as a competitor. Because for Enzo, cars had only one true purpose: to race and to win. And so, in the spring of 1947, the first true Ferrari was born, the 125S. This was not just a car, it was a declaration of independence. Designed by the gifted engineer Gioacchino Colombo, the 125S was powered by a 1.5-liter V12 engine, a configuration that would become Ferrari's calling card for decades to come. To Enzo, the V12 was not merely an engine, it was music. The scream of 12 cylinders became the very soul of Ferrari, a sound unlike anything else on the road or the racetrack. The car itself was light, nimble, and elegant. Its body, shaped by Carrozzeria Touring, reflected a distinctly Italian blend of art and engineering. But beneath the beauty was a machine designed for one thing: victory. On May 11, 1947, at the Piacenza circuit, the Ferrari 125S made its racing debut. Enzo later called it a promising failure. The car retired with a fuel pump problem, denying Ferrari a victory on its very first outing. But just 2 weeks later, at the Rome Grand Prix, the 125S returned. And this time, it won. The victory was historic. The Ferrari name had entered the record books, not just as a manufacturer, but as a force to be reckoned with. The prancing horse had galloped onto the stage of world motorsport, and it had arrived with triumph. For Enzo Ferrari, this was the vindication of decades of struggle. The young boy who had once stood trackside in 1908, captivated by the roar of a race car, was now the creator of one. The failures of his early driving career, the years of frustration under Alfa Romeo, the legal restrictions and wartime compromises, all of it had led to this moment. Ferrari was no longer a dream. It was real. But a single victory was not enough. Enzo knew that to survive, Ferrari needed more than racing success. He needed infrastructure, money, and an identity that extended beyond the racetrack. The solution lay in a delicate balance between passion and practicality. In Maranello, Enzo expanded his modest workshop into the first true Ferrari factory. It was not grand at first, little more than a cluster of buildings on rural land. But it was his, and that made all the difference. From here, he would oversee the construction of cars that would not only race, but also be sold to wealthy enthusiasts. Because Enzo understood something vital. If Ferrari was to finance its racing program, it needed to sell road cars. And so began one of the most enduring contradictions of his philosophy. Enzo often claimed he had no interest in road cars. "I build cars to race," he famously said. "The rest is to pay for the racing." Yet, paradoxically, it was the road cars, the sleek, expensive machines purchased by the rich and powerful, that kept Ferrari afloat. For Enzo, every Ferrari delivered to a customer was simply another weapon to finance the war he waged on the racetrack. Through the late 1940s, Ferrari steadily built its reputation. The 125S evolved into newer models, each bearing Colombo's V12 and each carrying the prancing horse to more victories. By the early 1950s, Ferrari was winning international races, challenging giants like Maserati, Alfa Romeo, and Jaguar. The small workshop in Maranello was transforming into the birthplace of legends. But even in this period of growth, the challenges were immense. Money was always scarce, and every car was a gamble. Each race risked disaster, a crash, a breakdown, a defeat that could undo months of work. Enzo pushed his men hard, demanding long hours and total commitment. To him, racing was not a job. It was war, and in war there could be no compromise. The foundation was laid, the name established, the first victories secured. Ferrari had been born not in comfort, but in fire. The fire of obsession, the fire of competition. The first Ferrari factory in Maranello, the 125S and its screaming V12, the triumph in Rome. These were the milestones that transformed Enzo from a dreamer into a founder. But Ferrari's story was still in its infancy. The 1950s would bring greater challenges than Enzo had ever faced: financial crises, fierce rivals, personal tragedy, and moments that threatened to destroy everything he had built. Because while Ferrari had now found its voice, it would soon be tested in ways that would shake the company, and Enzo himself, to the very core. The roar of the Ferrari 125S in 1947 had signaled the birth of a legend, but legends are not forged without trials. For Enzo Ferrari, the years that followed were some of the hardest of his life. Years defined by battles on the track, crises in the boardroom, and tragedies at home. By the early 1950s, Ferrari was no longer a curiosity, but a growing force in world motorsport. The company's scarlet red cars were winning races across Europe, challenging established giants. In 1951, Ferrari secured a historic victory at the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, defeating Alfa Romeo, the very company Enzo had once served. It was a symbolic triumph, proof that Ferrari had arrived. The following year, in 1952, Ferrari claimed its first Formula One World Championship, with Alberto Ascari dominating the season in the Ferrari 500. The small workshop from Maranello had taken on the might of Alfa Romeo, Maserati, and Mercedes, and won. But success came at a price. Racing was brutally expensive. Every new design, every race entry, every broken engine consumed money faster than it could be earned. Enzo had always said that road cars existed only to fund racing, but in the early 1950s, even that was barely enough. The company walked a fine line between glory and bankruptcy. To survive, Ferrari sold road-going versions of his race cars to wealthy clients. Models like the 166 Inter and the 212 Inter began attracting Europe's elite, who saw Ferrari not just as a car, but as a status symbol. Still, these sales were modest. Ferrari was no mass producer like Fiat. It remained a boutique constructor, each car hand-built, each sale critical to keeping the doors of Maranello open. And then there were the rivals. Ferrari's rise had not gone unnoticed. Maserati and Jaguar challenged them in endurance racing. Mercedes-Benz returned to Grand Prix racing in the mid-1950s with formidable machines, backed by German industrial might. The battles on track were fierce, and every defeat was a dagger to Enzo's pride. He demanded absolute commitment from his engineers and drivers. To work for Ferrari was to enter a world of unrelenting pressure, where failure was never an option. This intensity came at a human cost. Drivers risked their lives every time they climbed into a Ferrari. The 1950s were a deadly era in motorsport, and Ferrari's team was not spared. Legendary drivers like Alberto Ascari, Ferrari's first world champion, died tragically in 1955. Others followed in accidents at Le Mans, Monza, and countless circuits across Europe. Each loss scarred Enzo deeply, though outwardly he remained stoic. He often referred to his drivers as his sons, yet he sent them into battle knowing many would not return. Critics accused him of coldness, of sacrificing men for the sake of victory. Enzo's response was always the same. Racing was life, and death was part of it. But while Enzo could steel himself against the loss of drivers, he was unprepared for the tragedy that struck within his own family. His only legitimate son, Alfredo Dino Ferrari, born in 1932, had inherited his father's love for engineering. By the early 1950s, Dino was studying mechanical engineering and working on new projects at Ferrari. Enzo saw in him the heir to his empire, the one who might carry the prancing horse into the future. Then came the devastating diagnosis: muscular dystrophy. The disease was incurable, slowly robbing Dino of strength and mobility. Enzo, who had faced so much loss in his life, now confronted the greatest heartbreak of all: the decline of his beloved son. Despite his illness, Dino continued to work on projects at Maranello, particularly a new V6 engine design. Enzo cherished those moments, even as he watched his son grow weaker. On June 30th, 1956, Dino Ferrari died at just 24 years old. The impact on Enzo was profound. For all his reputation as a cold and calculating man, the loss of Dino shattered him. He wore black for the rest of his life in mourning. The grief deepened his obsession with his work, as though pouring his soul into Ferrari's victories could fill the void left by his son's absence. Later, when the company released cars powered by the V6 engine Dino had helped design, they bore his name, Ferrari Dino. Though marketed as a separate sub-brand, these cars were a tribute to Enzo's lost son, a legacy carved in metal. Meanwhile, the pressures of running Ferrari as both a racing team and a car company continued to mount. The cost of competition in Formula One and endurance racing was astronomical. Ferrari constantly needed new investors, sponsors, and wealthy clients to stay afloat. Enzo's uncompromising personality often made negotiations difficult. He clashed with partners, dismissed executives, and alienated potential allies. For him, compromise was weakness. He would run Ferrari on his terms, even if it meant walking on the edge of financial ruin. The late 1950s brought more trials. The 1957 Mille Miglia ended in tragedy when a Ferrari 335S crashed, killing driver Alfonso de Portago, his co-driver, and 10 spectators. The disaster shocked Italy and brought intense scrutiny upon Ferrari. Many called for an end to open-road racing. Enzo was even charged with manslaughter, though he was eventually acquitted. Still, the incident added to his reputation as a ruthless figure willing to risk lives for speed. By the turn of the 1960s, Ferrari stood at a crossroads. On the one hand, the company was achieving global recognition. Its road cars, like the 250 GT, were becoming objects of desire for wealthy collectors worldwide. Its race cars were winning in Formula One and at endurance events. On the other hand, Ferrari was stretched thin, struggling to balance the constant costs of racing with the demands of producing customer cars. And then came the corporate pressures. Larger manufacturers like Ford and Fiat watched Ferrari with interest. In America, the booming car market seemed like fertile ground for expansion. But Enzo resisted. He didn't want to become just another car maker. For him, Ferrari was not a business to be scaled. It was a racing team that sold cars merely to survive. The contradictions defined him. Adored by fans, feared by employees, envied by rivals, mistrusted by partners. Enzo Ferrari was building an empire, but it was one balanced on a knife's edge, threatened by financial crises, public scrutiny, and personal demons. And yet, from these struggles, something extraordinary was about to emerge. Out of the heartbreak, the rivalries, and the near-constant peril, Ferrari would create a car so legendary, so dominant, that it would transform the company's future forever. The late 1950s had tested Ferrari to its limits. Financial pressures, deadly accidents, and the devastating loss of Enzo's son Dino had left the company in a fragile state. Yet as the 1960s dawned, Ferrari was on the brink of creating something extraordinary. A car that would not only save the company, but define its legend for decades to come. That car was the Ferrari 250 series, a line of grand tourers and race cars that carried the prancing horse into a new golden era. The 250 lineage began in the early 1950s, powered by the genius of Gioacchino Colombo's 3.0-liter V12 engine. Compact, lightweight, and endlessly adaptable, this engine became the beating heart of Ferrari's greatest machines. Through multiple evolutions, Berlinetas, Testarossas, California Spiders, the 250 series showcased Ferrari's ability to blend elegance with performance like no one else. But among all these, one car would rise above the rest, the Ferrari 250 GTO. Introduced in 1962, the GTO was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Built to compete in FIA's Group 3 Grand Touring Car category, it was designed with one mission: to dominate endurance racing. But its beauty and rarity made it far more than just a racing machine. The 250 GTO was powered by a 3.0-liter V12 engine, producing around 300 horsepower, paired with a 5-speed manual gearbox. It could reach speeds of 174 miles per hour, blistering for its time. But what truly set it apart was its balance. Ferrari's engineers, led by Giotto Bizzarini, and later Mauro Forghieri after Bizzarini's fallout with Enzo, sculpted the GTO's body with painstaking attention to aerodynamics. Its long nose, aggressive stance, and flowing lines weren't just aesthetic, they were functional, giving the GTO stability at high speeds and an edge on the world's toughest circuits. Every detail was honed for performance. The chassis was a refined version of the 250 GT SWB, strengthened and lightened. The suspension was tuned for handling, and the interior stripped down to racing essentials. The result was a car that could withstand the brutal demands of 24-hour endurance races while delivering unmatched speed and agility. And on the track, the GTO was unstoppable. From 1962 to 1964, it won the FIA GT World Championship 3 years in a row, defeating rivals from Jaguar, Aston Martin, and Shelby. It triumphed at the Tour de France Automobile, the Targa Florio, and countless endurance events. To own a GTO was to own victory itself. But the GTO's story was not just about engineering, it was also about exclusivity. Enzo Ferrari, ever the master of mystique, carefully controlled who could buy one. Only 36 examples of the 250 GTO were built between 1962 and 1964, and buyers were hand-picked. Wealth alone wasn't enough. Enzo had to believe you were worthy of driving his masterpiece. This made the GTO not just a car, but an elite club, a rolling piece of art reserved for the chosen few. For Ferrari, the success of the 250 GTO was transformative. It proved that the company could dominate racing while also creating cars that were objects of desire for the wealthy. The GTO cemented Ferrari's dual identity. A race team first, a carmaker second, yet one whose road cars were now the most coveted in the world. The GTO also symbolized Ferrari's resilience. The company had endured the tragedies of the 1950s, the heartbreak of losing Dino, and the constant threat of financial collapse. But in the GTO, Enzo found a car that silenced doubts. It was proof that Ferrari wasn't just surviving. It was thriving, innovating, and leading. Looking back, it's impossible to overstate the cultural impact of the 250 GTO. At the time, it was a weapon of motorsport. Today, it stands as one of the most valuable cars ever built. In recent years, examples of the GTO have sold at auction for over $50 million, making it the holy grail of collectors. For enthusiasts, it represents the purest expression of Ferrari's ethos: speed, beauty, and exclusivity. Enzo himself understood the GTO's significance, though in his usual blunt way, he downplayed it. To him, it was simply the best tool available for winning races in the early 1960s. He rarely indulged in praise for individual cars, but for those around him, the GTO was a breakthrough, a machine that kept Ferrari financially alive and placed the company at the very top of the racing world. Still, behind the glamour, the battles raged on. The GTO's dominance drew the attention of larger automakers, particularly Ford Motor Company. Enzo's iron grip on Ferrari, his obsession with racing, and his unwillingness to compromise would soon lead to one of the most famous corporate showdowns in automotive history. But in the early 1960s, before the storm of Le Mans erupted, the 250 GTO stood as Ferrari's crowning achievement, the car that transformed the prancing horse from a scrappy post-war workshop into an empire. The legend of Ferrari was no longer just about a man and his will to race. It was now embodied in metal, roaring down racetracks, admired in showrooms, and etched into history as one of the greatest cars ever built. And yet, as with all legends, the triumph of the 250 GTO was only the beginning. The next chapter in Ferrari's saga would bring conflict, betrayal, and a transatlantic war for supremacy on the world's biggest stage, the 24 Hours of Le Mans. By the mid-1960s, Ferrari was no longer just an Italian racing outfit. Thanks to the dominance of the 250 GTO and the prestige of Ferrari's road cars, the prancing horse had become an international symbol of speed, luxury, and exclusivity. Yet, with success came challenges, and the fiercest one would come not from Europe, but from across the Atlantic. Ferrari's name was growing rapidly in America. Wealthy enthusiasts from New York to Los Angeles clamored for the latest models, from the elegant 250 GT California Spider to the racing-bred 275 GTB. Hollywood stars like Steve McQueen, James Coburn, and Clint Eastwood drove Ferraris, turning them into cultural icons as much as cars. For the American elite, Ferrari wasn't just transportation. It was a status symbol, proof that you had arrived. But while Ferrari basked in glamour, Enzo remained fixated on racing. And at the top of motorsport was the Holy Grail, the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Ferrari had already tasted victory at Le Mans throughout the 1950s and early 1960s. Cars like the 250 Testarossa and the 250 LM cemented Ferrari's reputation as the king of endurance racing. By 1965, Ferrari had won Le Mans 6 times in a row. No one seemed capable of stopping them. No one, that is, except Ford Motor Company. The rivalry began with business, not racing. In the early 1960s, Henry Ford II sought to buy Ferrari, aiming to add Italian prestige to the Ford empire. Negotiations dragged on, and for a brief moment it seemed the deal would happen. But at the last minute, Enzo Ferrari walked away. He refused to give up control of his racing team, and in doing so insulted Ford. Henry Ford II, furious, vowed revenge. His mission was simple: beat Ferrari at Le Mans. What followed was one of the greatest rivalries in automotive history. Ford poured millions into developing the GT40, a car designed explicitly to dethrone Ferrari. The first attempts failed. In 1964 and 1965, Ferrari continued to dominate, brushing aside Ford's challenge. But in 1966, the tide turned. At Le Mans that year, Ford arrived with overwhelming force. Multiple GT40s, backed by enormous resources and America's best engineering minds. Ferrari fought valiantly, but the GT40 was too powerful, too fast, too well-funded. After 24 brutal hours, Ford claimed a historic 1-2-3 finish, humiliating Ferrari on the very stage it had once ruled. For Enzo, it was a bitter defeat, not just a racing loss, but a personal blow. Yet even in defeat, Ferrari's reputation remained untarnished. If anything, the Ford versus Ferrari war elevated Ferrari further, immortalized decades later in books, documentaries, and the Hollywood film Ford v. Ferrari. The rivalry highlighted Ferrari's unique position in the automotive world. On one side stood Ford, a global industrial giant with limitless resources. On the other was Ferrari, a small company in rural Italy, producing cars in tiny numbers. And yet, for years, Ferrari had beaten them all. To many, Ferrari embodied the spirit of the underdog, an Italian David against corporate Goliaths. Even after Ford's victory, Ferrari continued to innovate. In 1967, the Ferrari 330 P4 emerged as one of the most beautiful and iconic race cars ever built, battling Ford in endurance racing with stunning style. Though Ford ultimately had the upper hand at Le Mans in the late 1960s, Ferrari's creations were unforgettable, combining engineering with artistry. Meanwhile, Ferrari's road cars were evolving into masterpieces of their own. The mid-1960s saw the introduction of the Dino 206 GT, named in honor of Enzo's late son. Sleek, compact, and powered by a V6, it was Ferrari's attempt at a more accessible sports car. Though some purists debated whether it was a true Ferrari, the Dino line won admiration for its design and performance, and served as a deeply personal tribute from Enzo. Then came the 365 GTB for Daytona in 1968, a car that epitomized Ferrari's blend of performance and style. With its sharp lines, long hood, and 352 horsepower V12, the Daytona became an instant classic, adored by enthusiasts and collectors alike. It symbolized Ferrari's transition from racing-focused machines to road cars that could conquer highways as easily as racetracks. But success came with growing pains. By the late 1960s, Ferrari was stretched thin. Racing consumed enormous resources, while demand for road cars surged. Enzo, now in his 70s, knew Ferrari needed stability to survive. In 1969, he struck a pivotal deal, selling 50% of Ferrari to Fiat. The move secured much-needed funding, allowing Ferrari to expand production while Enzo retained control of racing operations, his true passion. This partnership gave Ferrari a stronger foundation for global expansion. Throughout the 1970s, Ferrari models like the 308 GTB, the 365 GT4BB, and later the 512BB carried the marque's reputation worldwide. Ferrari dealerships opened across America, Europe, and Asia, transforming the prancing horse into a truly international brand. Culturally, Ferrari was everywhere. In films, on posters, and in songs, Ferrari came to symbolize not just cars, but the very idea of speed and success. From Formula One victories to appearances in Hollywood, Ferrari became woven into the global imagination. The prancing horse was no longer just Italy's pride, it was the world's automotive icon. Yet, for all the glamour, Ferrari's racing DNA remained at the core. The company continued to push boundaries in Formula One, producing legendary machines for drivers like Niki Lauda and Gilles Villeneuve. Every win, every podium, reinforced the link between Ferrari's road cars and its racing heritage. Enzo never let the world forget. Ferrari existed to race. By the time the 1970s closed, Ferrari had achieved what few thought possible. It had survived financial struggles, personal tragedies, and even defeat at Le Mans. In exchange, it had become a household name, a symbol of Italian excellence, and a dream for enthusiasts across the globe. Enzo Ferrari had taken a small workshop in Maranello and turned it into an empire. His stubbornness, his obsession with control, and his relentless pursuit of victory had shaped not just a company, but a legend. But as Ferrari grew into a global powerhouse, Enzo faced a new challenge: how to ensure the company remained true to its soul while meeting the demands of a rapidly changing world. The answer would come in the form of some of Ferrari's most daring creations, cars that would push the limits of design and performance, and one model in particular that would enter history as Ferrari's most legendary machine. By the mid-1980s, Ferrari had conquered the world. Its prancing horse symbolized wealth, speed, and Italian pride in every corner of the globe. Formula One victories kept the racing legacy alive, and its road cars had become must-have treasures for the world's elite. But despite Ferrari's global fame, Enzo himself was aging. He was a man in his late 80s, frail in health, but still sharp in mind and still stubbornly devoted to his company. And in 1987, just a year before his death, Enzo Ferrari unveiled the car that would become his greatest and most enduring statement, the Ferrari F40. The F40 wasn't just another Ferrari. It was the embodiment of everything Enzo believed in: purity of design, raw performance, and an uncompromising connection between man and machine. It was the last car personally approved by Enzo before his death, and it remains one of the most legendary cars ever built. The story of the F40 begins in the wake of competition. In the 1980s, Ferrari faced challenges not only from traditional rivals like Porsche and Lamborghini, but also from emerging Japanese performance cars that threatened to disrupt the supercar hierarchy. Porsche's 959, with its cutting-edge technology, was seen as the most advanced car of its time. Ferrari's response wasn't to out-tech Porsche, but to out-passion them. The F40 was developed as a no-compromise racing car for the road. Beneath its sharp, aggressive bodywork lay a 2.9-liter twin-turbocharged V8 engine, producing 478 horsepower, enough to propel the car from 0 to 60 mph in just 3.8 seconds and to a top speed of 201 mph. It was the first production car to break the 200 mph barrier, a symbol of Ferrari's refusal to be overshadowed. But more than speed, the F40 was about rawness. There were no electronic aids, no luxury comforts, no unnecessary weight. The car's body was made from lightweight Kevlar, carbon fiber, and aluminum. The interior was stripped bare. No carpets, no sound insulation, just exposed carbon panels and thin racing seats. Every decision was guided by one principle: performance above all else. Driving the F40 was an experience unlike any other. It was loud, brutal, and demanding. The turbos lagged and then kicked in with ferocious force, slamming the driver back into the seat. The steering was heavy but precise, the suspension stiff, and the cabin unbearably hot. It was not a car that coddled its driver. It punished mistakes, demanded skill, and rewarded courage. For Enzo Ferrari, this was the point. The F40 wasn't meant to be easy. It was meant to be pure. When the car was unveiled in 1987 to celebrate Ferrari's 40th anniversary, the world was stunned. Its aggressive wedge-shaped design, with its massive rear wing and iconic pop-up headlights, looked like nothing else on the road. It was futuristic, yet primal, a weapon disguised as a car. The press hailed it as the ultimate supercar, and enthusiasts immediately placed it in the pantheon of legends. Production was originally planned for just 400 units, but demand was so overwhelming that Ferrari built over 2,300 F40s between 1987 and 1992. Even so, the car remained elusive, available only to those wealthy and fortunate enough to secure one. Yet, unlike many exotic cars, the F40 wasn't just a garage queen. Owners drove them hard, on tracks, on roads, and even in competition. The F40 proved it could not only look incredible, but perform at the absolute highest level. Culturally, the F40 became a symbol of the 1980s, an era of excess, ambition, and speed. It appeared in posters on the walls of teenagers, in car magazines that praised its wild nature, and in countless television specials. For a generation, the F40 was the ultimate dream car, the purest expression of what a Ferrari could be. But its greatest legacy lay in its timing. Just a year after the F40's debut, Enzo Ferrari passed away in 1988 at the age of 90. For many, the F40 felt like his parting gift to the world, a final statement from the man who had built his life around speed, passion, and competition. Unlike the softer, more comfortable supercars that would follow in the 1990s, the F40 remained true to Enzo's old-world philosophy. It was harsh, it was uncompromising, and it was glorious. The F40 also laid the foundation for Ferrari's future hypercars. In later decades, Ferrari would release the F50, Enzo, LaFerrari, and beyond, each pushing technology and performance further. Today, the Ferrari F40 is one of the most sought-after classic cars in the world. Values have skyrocketed, with pristine examples selling for several $1 million. But more important than its monetary value is its symbolic one. The F40 represents Ferrari at its most authentic. Unfiltered by comfort, untouched by compromise, and driven by the vision of a man who believed that cars should stir the soul above all else. The F40's legend has only grown with time. For many, it remains the greatest Ferrari ever built, not because it was the fastest or the rarest, but because it captured the very essence of what Ferrari means. It is the car that best embodies the passion of Italy, the obsession of Enzo Ferrari, and the dream of driving taken to its most extreme form. As the 1980s ended and Ferrari moved into a new era under Fiat's guidance and new leadership, the F40 stood as a reminder of where it all began, with a boy from Modena who loved racing, who built cars to win, and who never settled for anything less than perfection. The Ferrari F40 was not just a car, it was Enzo Ferrari's final word, and it ensured that his legacy would live forever. Enzo Ferrari once said, "You cannot describe passion, you can only live it." And perhaps no man lived his passion more completely than he did. Born in the modest surroundings of Modena, forged in the chaos of war, and hardened by the unforgiving world of racing, Enzo Ferrari transformed his obsession into a global legend. What began as a small workshop after World War II became one of the most revered names in automotive history, a symbol of speed, power, and national pride. For Enzo, cars were never just machines. They were extensions of the human spirit. He saw them as living creatures, each engine with its own voice, each car with its own soul. That belief shaped everything Ferrari built, from the elegant lines of the 166 to the dominance of the 250 GTO, and finally to the unrelenting purity of the F40. His life was not without shadows. Enzo was known for being stubborn, demanding, even ruthless. He often drove his employees to exhaustion, sacrificed comfort for performance, and guarded his empire with an iron will. His relationships were marked by both loyalty and betrayal, and his critics accused him of being cold, even calculating. Yet it was precisely that relentless drive, that refusal to accept compromise, that made Ferrari what it is today. The racing victories tell one side of the story. Ferrari remains the most successful team in Formula One history, with championships that stretch across decades. Its cars have conquered the most grueling circuits in the world, from Le Mans to Monaco, and every victory, every trophy, carried the same unmistakable emblem, a black prancing horse on a yellow shield. But the cultural impact tells another. Ferrari became more than a racing team or a car company. It became an icon. To own a Ferrari wasn't just to own a car, it was to own a dream. The name carried with it a sense of prestige, artistry, and emotion that no other manufacturer could replicate. For Italians, Ferrari was, and still is, a point of national pride, a symbol of what their country could achieve on the global stage. For enthusiasts around the world, it became the ultimate expression of performance and beauty. The F40, unveiled in 1987, served as Enzo's final message. It was raw, uncompromising, and alive, a machine that perfectly embodied his philosophy. Just a year later, in 1988, Enzo passed away at the age of 90. With his death, the world lost not just a man, but a visionary who had dedicated his life to chasing speed and perfection. And yet, even in death, he lived on through the cars that bore his name. Ferrari's story did not end with Enzo. Under new leadership and changing times, the company has continued to innovate, producing hypercars like the LaFerrari and SF90 Stradale, while still dominating Formula One. The world has changed, technology has advanced, but Ferrari's essence has remained the same, an obsession with excellence, born from the passion of its founder. And perhaps that is the true legacy of Enzo Ferrari. Not just the cars, not just the championships, but the idea that passion, when pursued without compromise, can outlive the man who dreamed it. Every Ferrari that roars to life today carries his spirit. Every cheer at Monza, every flash of red on a Formula One circuit, every collector who treasures a Ferrari in their garage, all of it echoes back to that boy from Modena, standing outside a racetrack in 1908, watching cars thunder past, and deciding that one day he too would race. Over a century later, that dream has become immortal. Enzo Ferrari was not perfect. He was not always kind. But he was true to himself and to his vision. And in doing so, he gave the world something that transcends steel, rubber, and gasoline. He gave the world the prancing horse, a symbol of passion, power, and the eternal pursuit of speed. So when you hear the scream of a Ferrari engine, know this: it is more than a car. It is history. It is legacy. It is the heartbeat of Enzo Ferrari, still alive, still racing, still chasing the dream. The man is gone. The legend endures. The prancing horse will never stop running.